and just have a little bit of curiosity. Think about it. Be curious. Be, hey, can we actually improve it this way? Can we do this? What if? I was just telling somebody else the other day, use those words. What if? What if we do it this way? What if we try this? Like, people are so afraid of using those words in fear of failure that they're like, they don't want to even try anything. It blows my mind.
The more you sell, the more volume you create, the worse you make the problem. Yeah, I always boil it down. Ask yourself these questions. Do I need to do this? Can I delegate it? Can I automate it? And can I outsource it? Those are the questions you have to ask about everything.
There's a very delicate relationship between franchisor and franchisee. You push too hard on franchisees, they all get pissed off, they all talk to each other, and they'll just freaking revolt. I mean, it's crazy. You have to be honest with yourself. And all too often, I think people are lying to themselves. They're telling themselves that they're different. They're telling themselves that they're unique. They're telling their customers that they can save them 20%. And it just is so frustrating, man. Don't go in there leading with savings. Don't go in there leading with, you're an independent agency and like everybody else. You sound the exact same.
If you're a producer, you have no intention whatsoever of ever owning an agency. That doesn't mean you don't need to have processes in terms of how you're handling your day, blocking your calendar, the activities that you have.
What I wanted to mention there for anybody that's listening is not all referral partners are created equally. Everyone has a level of influence that varies. And so when you partner up with referral partners, in my case, it's franchisors, their level of influence is significantly higher than just your standard person. And so take that into consideration when working with referral partners, is trying to assess the level of influence. And you can figure that out by your conversion ratio from the referral partner. People want to point the finger at somebody else when in reality, it's 99% of the time, it's not a people problem, it's a process problem. Build your freaking process, document it, and then you have a standard that you can iterate upon in the future. But don't expect somebody out of the gate, green, fresh, whatever, to build the standard for you. It's stupid.
I'm selling the solution, not the policy. And I think too many peers in the industry view the policy as the solution. It's not. It's a Band-Aid, man. Too many times we're putting a Band-Aid on something, a wound that needs staples, and we're not even taking the time to identify it. We just need to get more coverage. Let's get more Band-Aids. Fix what's causing the problem. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. And today we have got a really interesting conversation headed your way. I'm with Wade Milward from Rikor, and they specialize in helping franchises. And we're going to get into tech stack, how they sell, how they, who they're looking for in terms of producers, what their philosophy is on all of that. But before we do, I want to have Wade talk a little bit about his background so that he has some credibility before we get into all the wild stuff we're going to talk about later. So what's up, man? Give him the lowdown.
Dude. Yeah, appreciate you having me on here. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to the conversation. A little bit of the background. I'm approaching 2 decades now in the insurance industry. So I'm at 17 years. I'm like everybody else that's listening to this podcast. I fell into the insurance industry because my father was in the insurance industry. So we're all in the same boat there. I got home from a mission that I served in the Philippines for 2 years, learned to speak fluent Tagalog, and then started working for my dad in 2007. Same way as everybody else, started at a brown desk with a large Excel spreadsheet and was asked to do a bunch of cold calls. So I did that for a long time. The one of the unique experiences that I had is we actually built our own agency management system specific for us. I became product owner of that, not knowing what a product owner was in 2008. So I was working with an offshore development team for about 10 to 12 years. I was doing all the UI, the UX, all testing, everything while building a book of business. So super strange background with insurance. And eventually built a relatively sizable book of business with mostly small business and mid-sized business across the country. I think it ended up being about a $1.2 million, $1.3 million revenue book, which was awesome. And then eventually it wasn't working out anymore and decided to start this crazy thing and left the book of business and started from scratch again.
The amount of parallel between your story and mine is insane, honestly.
Wild.
Because very similar in terms of how we got to where we are now. And I did not build my own agency management system. Some days I feel like I have, based on the amount of money and time we've invested in building out HubSpot to the level that we have it in the agency now. But very, very similar, man. So it's going to be interesting to talk. The one difference that I heard you say is small and medium sized business. And I can't imagine having a 1.2, $1.3 million book of smaller business. My stuff is pretty much in the middle market, and I try and
Yep.
stay, between 25 and 50 grand in agency revenue. I've got a few that have crept over six figures that I've picked up over the years, but I couldn't imagine keeping up with a book of business like that. And I have a feeling that probably has something to do with you setting out to build the agency management system and maybe even some of the deliverables that you have for your clients today. So, I know that when we talked before we started recording, you gave me kind of the 10,000 foot overview that you deal with. Is it franchisees or franchisors? I don't, or both.
Both.
So
Correct.
talk about how you got into that and why
Yeah.
you found that to be lucrative for you.
Yeah. Opportunity is everywhere if you're willing to look for it. And when I was building my book of business, I had a franchisee that actually approached me with one of my current clients. This is back in 2018. And she was actually larger. She was 100 million revenue shop as a franchisee, 23 locations, like not your ordinary franchise for sure. I had a sprinkling of mid-market, right? And I actually had one
Yeah, I was
very
gonna
large
say,
account.
dude, this isn't like Sally's spray tan that's got three
No,
locations in a
no,
strip
no,
mall near
no.
you. That's serious business.
It was serious business. Yeah, they were no joke. Dude, she was phenomenal. But she approached me one day, Dave, and she was asked me to solve her problems. And it was certificates of insurance, which I'm sure you're all laughing about now, and leveraging their buying power as a franchise. And so instead of traditional large broker mindset, hey, go to a carrier, create a program, an E&O program for the real estate group, I just wasn't interested in doing that. So I built this concept, right? I had software as my background, and I built this concept, and it came to me in a moment, and I put it on a pitch deck, and I had a designer help me kind of mock it up with like some UI UX. This is back in 2018 time, and I presented it to them, and they were all about it.
Hmm.
That they were super excited about it, and I was like, well, I got nothing, so now I should probably start to do some more market research before I build anything. And I was introduced to a local franchisor who unbeknown to me was very successful and had quite a bit of influence in franchising. And I went to him. I saw him at a pizza place here locally in Utah. He shows up in his white Porsche, comes in, super cool guy, sits down. I open up my little pitch deck. I'm asking all the questions, right? Hey, what about this? What about this? And he just stops me. He's like, wait, you don't understand. He goes, every single franchise has this exact same problem. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he began to tell me his story. And so what had happened to him is he had just ended or got out of a litigation of 5 years that resulted in him having to settle for $5 million for the exact problem that I'm trying to solve for. So it was visceral for him. He was experiencing it. He just went through it. And so that's where it was like, to me, it was like an indicator of like, oh my gosh, this is, you got to do something about this.
Isn't that music to your ears when you find out that the problem you're solving is applicable across the board? It's like, holy cow, talk about a great message for the day. So you go do your market research, you decide, okay, this makes sense. I know exactly what this guy's talking about. What did the process look like as you're going through and building out this solution to be able to deliver it to your clients and prospects?
Yeah. So it wasn't for another year and a half that I actually started that process, which is crazy to think about. But I went home, I was telling my wife about it. I was all excited about my new idea, which, I have 1 million a day. And she sat me down and she looked me straight in the eyes and she said, you're not ready. And that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, man. She suggested that I focus on one thing at a time. And at that time, I was actually doing something else in the transportation space. And so I saw that thing through for another 18 months until I had a big kind of fallout with the family agency. And ultimately that was the moment. There was kind of this catalyst, this event that happened. I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go do this thing. And that's really when that market research process started again. I called up that franchise guy. His name is Scott. I was like, hey, you still interested in jumping in this thing with me? And he's like, yeah, happy to. He became an investor, more like a silent advisor. And he just started to introduce me to other franchisors that he knew. So having somebody of influence that was able to get me in the doors that I needed to was, I mean, it saved me 6 years probably.
Wow. So I know that when we had our initial exchange on LinkedIn, one of the things that we talked about was insurance is kind of secondary. At least it is to me, not necessarily that it's secondary, but as far as my sales process go, 100% it's secondary. Like I'll go in, talk about tech stack, talk about total cost of risk, identify the problems that we see based on the loss runs, how we would propose to fix those things. And to me, insurance, I don't look, I know people are going to get pissed off when they hear me say this, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's a commoditized shuffling of paperwork. Anybody with a license is perceived to be on a level playing field. If I'm a buyer and 5 people walk in to sell me, in my mind, all 5 of them are the same unless one of them has a completely unique and different message. And then I'm either going to think they're crazy or I'm going to think they're a genius. And I prefer to be that guy. So I would rather come in and take that approach. And the way that I explain it, my hook when I'm ready to close the deal is, I realize you have a lot of choices for insurance, but from what I can gather in talking with you today, this is the first time you've ever heard anybody come in and focus on an approach that's actually going to give you sustainable results for the long term. I can do this for you. It's going to be really expensive. Or if you want to use money you're already spending, I view the placement of your insurance program as the funding mechanism for you to be able to purchase my value proposition today with no extra money out of pocket. How does that sound? And that's it. I'm selling the solution, not the policy. And I think too many peers in the industry view the policy as the solution. It's not. It's a Band-Aid, man. Too many times we're putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs staples, and we're not even taking the time to identify it. No, we just need to get more coverage. Let's get more Band-Aids. No, fix what's causing the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're, I mean, we talk about it all the time, unfortunately. We use this type of language in their industry, which sell insurance. That's the first problem. All the brokers out there and all the producers out there are out there selling insurance, and that's not what you're supposed to be doing. Insurance, like you talked about earlier, I had the actually same philosophy. Insurance is a byproduct of all the other stuff that you're doing, whether it's, like you said, risk review or loss runs or anything else, or it's other things like you're leveraging technology to improve their overall risk score or manage their risk. Like that's what differentiates you in the marketplace. And insurance is simply that's something that they acquire through you, but it's not your differentiator. It makes we're all the same. I had that revelation years ago when I was going up against, I had the standard conversion ratio of 20-25% or something like that. That's in their industry. And I was like, I'm tired of this. I'm sick and tired of going up against everybody else, and the customer cannot see the actual difference. And that's on me to figure out. Right. But like, that's where it led me to all these things that we're building today. And I mean, it's night and day, the results.
So you have clients all over the country now. How do you take this and scale it to where, I mean, obviously with franchisees, if you're with national brands, there's a strategy that you can use to leverage one relationship to get to 5, to get in front of whoever makes those decisions for the mothership. But I mean, let's face it, man, half the time that's like Aon, Willis, Marsh, your national brokers that get all of these referrals. But I mean, we're at a point now where technology completely levels the playing field. You could be a one-man operation and compete against Marsh in my book.
Yeah, we are competing against the top 10, Marshes, USI, Gallagher's, all those kind of guys, where we're coming in there with a completely different approach. And I'm not going franchisee first. In fact, I refuse to go franchisee first if they come after me and I don't have a relationship with the franchisor yet. So my relationship strategy is work with the franchisor, work with the C-suite, get them to actually adopt our technology solution to monitor insurance compliance effectively across the entire board. Oh, and guess what? In exchange, I give the software away for free. In exchange, I become the preferred broker. No other incumbent can be in there. No other broker, no other relationships. I'm not the required though. It's all about optics. I'm the preferred. Right. And then we build ourselves into their existing system. So they have onboarding experience. Well, guess what? We have a link that we put it in there. We have a language, we have copy, we put it all inside of their existing systems. And so now every single franchisee is introduced to us, and we have just, we set up a really effective process to be able to engage with the franchisee, keep them updated about the progress of the insurance, all that kind of stuff.
So you said something interesting, and I'd like to hear, if you're willing to share it, how you handle that. So you have a franchisee who comes at you and wants to do business with you, but you want to have the relationship with the franchisor first.
Yeah.
How do you parlay that? What's that conversation look like?
Yeah, as the conversation, we try to do is we try to help them understand that the experience that we try to create is not as good if they just come to us individually. We become more of a general insurance agency, that type of experience. But if we partner up with the franchisor, so we typically ask for an introduction to the franchisor at that point. And we say, hey, if we actually work with the franchisor, we can elevate the experience, we can simplify the insurance purchasing process, we can do X, Y, and Z for you. How does that sound? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the influence of the franchisee at that point, because the franchisor is going to make up their own decisions anyway for the entire brand, but that's how it works.
How often does that happen though at this point? I mean, you guys have been around for a few years doing this. Is it still a regular occurrence that you have individual franchisees that are reaching out to you, or are you actually at a point now where you're getting referrals from franchisor to franchisor across different brands?
Correct. Yeah, franchisor to franchisor is happening pretty often now. We tapped into the what I call hypergrowth emerging franchise brands in the past few years, which are these brands that partner up with these third parties called franchise sales organizations, and they grow relatively quick, which allowed us to get immediate traction. Getting into an existing franchise brand that's not growing quick is difficult because you still are working with individual owner operators, right? So it's still a long sales process. You're still waiting for the expiration date. I don't ever expect anybody to roll over. It's way too much friction. Now we're going upstream and we're working at the platform level, which is private equity backed platforms that own 5+ franchise brands, which is a very, very fun sales process. Longer, but it's exciting. That said, franchisees that come to us that we don't partner up with yet, a couple every other month, maybe something like that. It's not very much.
Yeah, but it's cool, man. It sounds like you've got it dialed in. And I mean, do you have any particular I mean, obviously there's a lot of things that could be franchised. I mean, to your point about even dealing with individuals in that process, I remember being a young producer like you almost 20 years ago now, and having an opportunity. And again, like, everybody that's listening to this is going to laugh because it's exactly what we would never talk about doing now. But I had 2 days to get coverage for somebody who owned 20 Burger Kings, and it was like the last minute. They'd already been 5 other places, and of course I did what any brand new producer would do, man. I dropped everything else I was doing,
hustle, baby, let's go,
to focus on this thing. In you know I learned very, very quickly that's not how I wanted to do things. Specifically, and I understand your point too about dealing with the franchisee specifically, because once we started, getting involved in that, I realized that the franchisor had a lot of control over who they could use as a broker, who they could use as a carrier, what the expectations were. And, I decided I probably would want to be on the franchisor side of the equation, myself. But so that was one random thought that I had, just to circle back and close up. But I'm just interested, like, any specific like industry that you like more than another. I mean, I know that you say that it applies to pretty much any kind of a franchise out there, but
I truly believe in being hyper focused. So I wanted to touch on just what you mentioned just now for a moment, and then jump over back to what we were talking about. But you talked about getting in with this franchisee and possibly partnering up with the franchisor. And what I wanted to mention there for anybody that's listening is not all referral partners are created equally. Everyone has a level of influence that varies. And so when you partner up with referral partners, in my case, it's franchisors, their level of influence is significantly higher than just your standard person. And so take that into consideration when working with referral partners, is trying to assess the level of influence. And you can figure that out by your conversion ratio from the referral partner. And sometimes it doesn't make any sense working with some guy that you're getting average conversion ratios with. Going back over to what you're talking about with the industry, is we actually fell into home servicing, artisan contractors in franchising, which we found out to be perfect for COVID. So I think luck is a byproduct of action, man. We were taking all the action in the world. We actually got lucky because Scott was from home servicing, so his contacts were all artisan contractors as well. During COVID, artisan contractor, home servicing, home repairs skyrocketed, franchising exploded. So like it was the perfect storm for us. Like it was kind of crazy. I'm not
Well, and
saying that
also to your point earlier, venture money started dumping in right around the time,
stupid.
maybe a
Yeah.
year before COVID or whatever. But, there's a lot. We talk about all of the aggregation and roll ups in the insurance industry. Service contractors are no different with the investment
Yep.
environment.
Correct. Correct. Lots of PE in the franchising home service space. They love it because it's recession proof and all the other reasons you would love home servicing. It's AI can't take it over. Somebody's got to come out and fix the toilet. Like it's awesome. So, but yeah, we focus a lot on home servicing, and then you start to understand why. And it's probably very similar to why other people work on contractors in the general space, is because they're relatively difficult. They're more challenging than like your quick service restaurant, and most producers don't know how to do it correctly. So I love that gray area, that stuff that's borderline E&S because of that reason. If you can clean it up and figure it out and make sure it's done right, take care of the bad exclusions, all that, oh my gosh, you win. Your conversion ratio goes through the roof. And so we're offering this solution where, insurance compliance is great for the franchisor, but how do we make it simple for the franchisee to get the insurance they need? Not the insurance they think they want, or not the insurance they want to buy because sometimes it's too cheap or it's not done right, but what they actually need. And then we bundle it with education and consulting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I've seen it on both sides, and I'm interested how you've seen this play out. But this is personal to me because I have a pretty healthy book of service contractors. That's
Yep.
like my markets are set up for that. My value proposition, the risk management services we deliver. Like if I can get in front of that person that's my ideal prospect in the service contractor space, I'm going to win way more than I'm going to lose because I've built my practice around that.
Correct.
Specifically. I've seen it both ways though. I've seen it where PE will come in, they'll do the roll up, they'll do and I mean the deals are almost structured like the agency deals are. 80% cash, 20% stock. You're going to stick around. We want you to recruit other contractors to come in, and then you can help buy into that so your share price will go up, and then ultimately the second time you sell and recapitalize, you're going to make more than the first, and the third you're going to make more than you did the second. And so probably 4 years ago now, I lost about $250,000 in revenue in my book across 3 accounts that were service contractors, and I had no way of combating it because PE came in and bought them.
Yeah.
But where I was going with that is in those cases, I didn't have a fighting chance because they didn't give them the option of still maintaining their own insurance program. Everything was rolled up into a common program at that point. And I'm interested is, when you're out dealing with these franchisees, how often are you seeing master programs that everybody's essentially required to participate in? And that's number one. And number two, like, is there a way to break that? And the reason why I say that is this. One of my good friends was one of those accounts that I lost because it went into PE, and they required him to move into their program, which was a total account retrospectively rated program across all lines. They had it in the fine print or it wasn't in fine print and he missed it. Somehow he didn't know he went from taking a $5,000 deductible to a $100,000 deductible. And that's what was put on the master program. That's what you agreed when you went in. And that's how they were controlling the overall insurance cost. And I'm just wondering, like, how much of that have you run into where you go in and maybe they do have a master program and your advice is that's not the best idea, or vice versa?
Sure. With your experience in that PE and your buddy, was that franchise related or outside of franchising?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily franchise. I mean, I think they all maintain their own brand, but they were bought by, all 3 of them got bought by the same freaking group too, man.
Yeah.
Because they came in and saw the risk profile. They were operating profitably. Shame on me, for having us do such a good job and clean it up, because the businesses all had mods well over 1.5 when we took it on. And then, 5 or 6 years in, now they're clean. They know each other.
Wow.
Shame on me for inviting my clients to events where they can meet each other and hang out, because they probably did the deal on a napkin at my Christmas party.
And typically, private equity groups, for everybody that's listening, comes in, they usually want majority ownership. Is that the same case as your friends?
Yeah, usually. So
Okay.
what I've seen is, similar to and I've not seen a term sheet to sell my agency, but I have a good idea for the number of calls that we get and some of the conversations I've had with friends. But typically those deals are done with a nice payout in cash on the front end, and then you reserve shares in the surviving
Yep.
organization at like a
Yep.
20 or 25% of whatever the overall value of the deal is.
Yep. Yeah. So I wanted to just make sure that we understood the differences between private equity outside of franchising and private equity within franchising, because they are unique. So there is a lot of M&A activity. I know several of the private equity firms. I have conversations with them because that's also a part of our strategy, is working with them. You're at the very tippy top, right? And then you're getting
Oh
down
yeah.
into everybody else. So that's our strategy as well. But what happens with the franchising industry is you have to remember that the franchisees are all individually owned and operated. So they all have their own entity, their own ownership structure. So a PE firm can come in, they buy the actual franchising entity, the franchisor, but they actually aren't telling all the franchisees what to do at that point. There's a very delicate relationship between franchisor and franchisee. You push too hard on franchisees, they all get pissed off, they all talk to each other, and they'll just freaking revolt. I mean, it's crazy. So
I've seen it. I've seen it down here.
yes.
With Five Guys specifically, and I'm not
Yeah.
asking you to name any company names or whatever. I'm just going to use it as an example. And if you're in Florida, then you know this. But in the town that I'm in, Five Guys got a little squirrely. It looked like, from the outside with what they were expecting, or they went up on whatever their billing was to the franchisees.
Yep.
And I watched franchisees just abandon, like, oh, we're out, forget it. And they
Yep.
next thing you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
whether, I don't remember how many, if it was months or a year or more later, but now you have a strikingly similar concept that has a private name that
How
shows
about
up
that?
that's
They
basically
swap it.
doing, the
Yeah.
exact same thing. Now, in that specific instance, both of the second entities that these people came out with failed, and they're gone now too.
Sure.
But I
Sure.
understand what you're saying, man. I mean, that's
Yeah.
probably a very, and my goodness, how many different personality types are you having to manage
Oh
as the
my gosh.
franchisee, man, or franchisor, rather.
Franchisor. I say it all the time, and we deal with it a little bit, right? Because we're working with a lot of different personalities and franchisees, but like the franchisors have it. I mean, I tell them, I'm like, you have probably one of the hardest jobs, because what they are trying to do is help a entrepreneur become basically an entrepreneur and own their own business and navigate how to build a profitable company. Really difficult. And if anything goes south or sour, that franchisee is coming after the franchisor and telling them that they did it wrong and all that kind of stuff. And trust me, there are plenty of bad apples and bad actors of franchisors, but there's a lot of really good ones that have been phenomenal systems. And if you just follow the formula, you'll succeed in the end. But it's challenging for sure.
I'll tell you what, man. I'm an entrepreneur by heart, always have been. Worked for corporate organizations in retail, running grocery stores and ultimately super targets before I left the retail sector. And I left because I felt like I knew a better way of doing things in between my time in grocery and super target. And I decided I was just going to start a service company from scratch. And
Wow.
I'm always willing to bet on myself. So we did landscape maintenance, installation, pressure
Yeah.
washing, anything, one-stop shop. Horrible from an insurance and risk management
Of
standpoint, but
course.
I claim ignorance because I was the guy that was probably cutting down trees when my GL
Oh,
said I was washing your driveway.
yep.
So,
Yep.
but the lesson that I learned with that was it's a whole lot easier to run a business that's already got a proven and established framework of success,
Yes.
that if all you have to do is implement it. So
Yes.
I went from absolutely nothing. And my problem was I did sell the deals, man. I scaled the company extremely quickly. What I didn't do well was manage my receivables. And I had a
Yeah.
very difficult time being the good guy and the bad guy. So when it was time to
Yeah.
collect, I would just I would just not pay one of my own bills or something, as opposed to putting
Oh,
the screws to somebody who owed me money. And ultimately, I just decided I'd had enough. I gave the company to the guy that was my foreman. He still runs it today, and it's far more
wow.
profitable than when I ran it. But I left, and then I went. That's when I made the transition, and I went to work for Super Target. And the thing that I will say, like, number one, great organization to work for from a training and development and an opportunity to
Mm,
advance standpoint. And the one thing that I will tell you specifically was Target operates, I have to imagine they still do. I've not, been in the back room of one for a while, but I have to believe they still operate off of common practices. Every process and procedure in the store had a trifold brochure of exactly what you needed to do to operate by common practice. And my last role with them was opening up new stores and traveling around and fixing broken stores. And all I had to do was go to the area that was broken on the diagnostic toolkit and get where they were substandard operational index, go to that part of the store, watch, and I could tell you exactly what they were doing that was outside of common practice. Now, one school of thought could assume that everybody that was there was a robot and they were just, droning on following the same set of rules. I'm here to tell you they spent a ton of money figuring out what worked best. And if all you did was do what they said you needed to do, if you weren't hitting your numbers, but your operational tool card was 100% on point, they're not really going to be able to say much because you're executing literally to perfection of what they ask you to do. I imagine the franchisee-franchisor relationship has a little bit of that dynamic to it, to where the franchisor's got it figured out. This is our business model. I mean, I don't know, other than what I see on Shark Tank, that, sometimes these places have 2 or 3, maybe 4 locations, and they start to catch on. And then they say, you know what, we ought to franchise this and take this thing national. But they figured out the secret sauce to some degree that would work. But if you have people that are entrepreneurial enough to want to go out and buy a franchise of something, they're still a little bit free-spirited and free thinkers, and probably think, oh, well, I see what they're saying, but I think I could do this and make it work better. I mean, I got to believe that's a constant tug and pull between the two.
Yeah, they're absolutely. That's what franchising is. Franchising is actually selling the system. It's an operating manual, right? It's a 400-page document. Quite literally, I've seen them, of exactly how to run and operate a business and everything that you can imagine, all the nuts and bolts. And so like taking that and coming over and thinking about, like, for any agency owner that's thinking about this, like it's very clear to me, David, why small business owners stay small is because they don't build out their operating manual. They don't have operating procedures. They don't have systems. They can't delegate, right? You've been such a good producer that you refuse to stop producing. And yet you're not focusing on building the business. You're too stuck in the weeds.
That's one of the biggest issues I see. And I mean, I talk to literally probably a couple thousand producers a year across the various modes of communication that I have, whether it be, speaking at an event in public and spending time after, or one-on-one coaching calls in my community, or the webinars that we do or whatever. And you're 100% right, man. I mean, that's one of the biggest issues I see. And I think part of it's because if you're a pure producer, that's what that's what you're good at. That's what you're going to gravitate toward. I can be a good operator. I can't be both simultaneously.
You cannot.
It's just not the way that my mind works. And so anytime I get the question about, hey, I think I probably need some VAs to come in and help me. I'm not ready to bring in an account manager yet, but if I can get a VA or maybe even 2 VAs to be able to just get some of this service work off my plate, I can keep producing and then make more money. And as time goes on, I'll have enough to bring somebody in. And my first question is, do you have formalized operating procedures? Like,
what are they going to do?
What are they going to do when they show up day one? And they never think about
it. Out.
But dude, that's how a producer's wired.
Unbelievable.
Like, look, I want a new car, I'll just go sell another deal. I want to go buy a custom suit, I'll sell another deal. Like we sell our way out of our problems. The problem is the more you sell, the more volume you create, the worse you make the problem. And I always boil it down. Ask yourself these questions. Do I need to do this? Can I delegate it? Can I automate it? And can I outsource it? Those are the questions you have to ask about everything. And if you're the absolute only person that's going to do this or ever be able to do it, then there's no point in you worrying about putting any process or procedure in place if nobody else is ever going to have that responsibility. But if you could delegate it or you could outsource it, you need to start documenting what you're doing as quick as you can. And there's a lot of tools out there. Tango, I don't remember, it's tango.io or tango.us or whatever, will allow
Sure.
you to go on the website that you're in Chrome that you're going to quote in, start an instance in Tango, go through the quote in real time. You're not narrating, you're not slowing down, end the instance when you're done, and it will produce a PDF that tells you everything you did every time you click the mouse. Take
Yep.
10 minutes, go through it, clean it up as much as you need to, and then put it in a folder somewhere or put it on SharePoint. Now, when you
Yep.
have a VA that needs to know how to quote a personal auto with Travelers, they can pull that document out. It's going to show them step by step, and you didn't slow down while you're trying to produce to be able to train them to do that. But the time to do
Correct.
it is when you're starting out. Every single time you do something new, capture that, record that, because by the
Yep.
time you're ready to bring people in, you're not going to want to slow down and have to do that stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And that's the thing is we talk often about delegation. And so I'm glad you actually dove deeper into what delegation means. Often I think people have a misconception of what delegation is. It's like, oh, just pass it on to somebody else. It's like, no, no, no. Pump the brakes for a moment. Let's actually document what you've done in the past to make you successful. Because what people don't realize is that you've figured it out. Whether it took you 6 months or 5 years, you've learned all of the problems and you've figured out how to navigate through the problems or mitigate those as much as possible. And so you're going to then tell a VA offshore to go and figure out this stuff and not give them your 5 years of institutional knowledge. It freaking blows my mind, dude, that this is happening. And then all of a sudden they point the finger at the other guy and it's like, your fault. No, 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 no. It's not their fault. It's your fault for not building the process in the first place. I get so fired up about this because like people want to point the finger at somebody else when in reality, it's 99% of the time, it's not a people problem. It's a process problem. Build your freaking process, document it, and then you have a standard that you can iterate upon in the future. But don't expect somebody out of the gate, green, fresh, whatever, to build the standard for you. It's stupid.
Yeah, no, it's nuts. But unfortunately, that's what
I know.
we see, and
but that's you know what though, and I don't even feel bad saying this. Better opportunity for everybody else that's actually doing it.
Agreed. No, I mean, look, there is no purer form of natural selection than operating inside the insurance industry. It is survival of the fittest. And, I think automation goes down that same line too. I don't expect an agent to be an automation expert. They don't need to know how to program a CRM and do if-then logic or any of that stuff. But where I see them fail, and to your point, our industry lacks a tremendous amount of self-accountability, period. Like, it's so easy to point the finger at other people and blame them for it, as opposed to just looking in the mirror and saying, I screwed this up. I need to fix it. How am I going to do it? And I see this happen as much with technology as anything else, where, like I mentioned it already, we have HubSpot. And it's pretty well documented that over the course of the last 6 years, we've probably spent close to $500,000 building HubSpot out.
Yes.
And so if I get up on stage in a room full of agents and I say, we have a great CRM, we've built it out, it cost us about $500,000 to do it, I've lost them at that point, because all they heard was I spent $500,000. They don't know that it was over 6 years because they tuned me out by the time I got to that point. And they also aren't going to hear the fact that my CRM does the work of 5 to 6 bodies that I would have to have do those same things that would have cost me a multiple of that $500,000 over the 6 years that we've built it out. And so, but what I see happen is we look at technology, we look at the shiny object, we want to incorporate that because we heard somebody talk about how great it's working for them.
Yep.
But then we never put any effort into it, whether that effort be a time investment to learn it, whether it be in executing and actually putting your information into the CRM, or making the investment to build it out to where you want it to be. Our industry has some really good software to a point that works out of the box. But if you go buy a HubSpot or you go buy a Salesforce, that is the technological equivalent of you going and contracting with a virtual assistant company for humans to do work for you. Both of them, you're buying a chassis. You still have to build the car around it. You still have to put the gas in the engine. And that's where the disconnect is. Too many people will say, oh, well, I'm going to go get HubSpot. And then when they find out, no matter how many times you bring it up, how much it's going to cost to build it out, you know, they'll spend $25,000, $50,000, and then they cut bait and they move to something else. And then they move to something else because it's not working. That's not how this works, man. You got to figure out what it is you're going to do, invest in it, and then go all in on it, period. If it's not working after you've gone all in and can honestly say, I've spent the money, I've spent the time, this is just not working, then I can completely understand that. But I've watched people that I know personally move 3-4 CRMs over the course of 12 to 18 months, multiple agency management systems, and the only common denominator is them. They're the common denominator.
How much more revenue did they generate by switching all the CRMs?
How much did they lose? Like
how much? That's I could agree with you all day long on that entire subject. So I'm not going to repeat everything because you're getting me all fired up. But I'm trying to. I see it all the time, man. It's absolutely insane. The one thing I will add to that is that people often, like you said, you don't have to be a tech expert. You don't have to be a CRM expert. This actually, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but this is the way I do things. Everything starts manually in the first place anyway. Like we try things out. We have human capital that's going out there and doing the things, sending the emails, iterating on the email templates, the sequence, the timing, everything that you could imagine. And then guess what? We figured out a little formula. How do we automate that now? And
100%. All of a sudden, you can't automate things and optimize processes until you found the wrong way to do it a few times.
That's it.
It's the Thomas Edison quote. I found I figured out 100 different ways not to build a light bulb or whatever the quote is. I'm sure I butchered it. 9,000. But it's basically that concept. You have to start manually to determine what the most efficient way is for you to operate.
And just have a little bit of curiosity. Think about it. Be curious. Hey, can we actually improve it this way? Can we do this? What if? I was just telling somebody else the other day, use those words. What if? What if we do it this way? What if we try this? Like people are so afraid of using those words in fear of failure that they're like, they don't want to even try anything. It blows my mind. But I wanted to touch on just kind of like our experience with this manual to automated process, just with our new lead process, our new prospect. When we first started out, my guys were doing roughly, I can't remember, I'm always bad at these numbers, like $15,000 of revenue a month in small business insurance, which is pretty awesome.
It's a lot of small business, man.
It is a lot of small business. And it's like, how do you actually improve margin? How do you improve operations and efficiency within the organization to make it actual profitable? It's really difficult to do that. But I kept asking the question, like, well, what if we do it this way? Well, what if we do it this way? Today, on average, our guys are doing $25,000 each in revenue a month in small business insurance. It's absolutely insane. And so we just keep chipping away at this thing with some more automations, but all of our automations are in an effort to actually improve the human to human experience. So we're trying to get our guys on the phone, do discovery calls, do presentation calls, and then we're trying to build out more automations to do all the, what I call non-value add activities.
So I think that, I'm trying to think of what I want to ask next. What would be your advice, knowing you're almost 2 decades in now? What would be your advice to somebody who's coming into the industry, maybe, or even better, they're a producer and they think, you know what, I want to go start my own agency and I'm going to start it from scratch. I think I can do it better.
Love it. What would I say to them?
Yeah. What would be your advice?
So, first is you need to be honest with yourself and ask yourself what is going to differentiate you in the eyes of the customer. You having prior experience is not a differentiator. You being an independent insurance agency with access to 15 carriers is not a differentiator. You maybe even focusing on a niche, right, to a degree, is still not a differentiator. It's not unique enough. And so you have to actually figure out what is unique about you. It often comes down into the mundane, the kind of nitty gritty stuff, like the service element. Like I love, like David, you have a great example, right, of what you guys do. It's the risk management, the risk review. Insurance and risk management, oddly enough, are separate, and insurance producers don't do enough of risk management, which is they just exist to sell insurance, which blows my mind. And so like, are you doing the risk review? Are you looking at the loss runs? Are you doing a 6-month audit to determine if their revenue or their exposures are changing? Like what kind of deliverables do you have? Do you have a driver acceptability thing? Like you have to be honest with yourself. And all too often, I think people are lying to themselves. They're telling themselves that they're different. They're telling themselves that they're unique. They're telling their customers that they can save them 20%. And it just is so frustrating, man. Don't go in there leading with savings. Don't go in there leading with, you're an independent agency and like everybody else, you sound the exact same.
What have we missed?
I don't know.
Anything you wanted to get out there that we haven't covered?
No, it was a good conversation. I love actually talking about operations. I don't think we talk about that enough. I've been on a few podcasts. Usually it's about the business concept, but I liked how we talked about that. So people that are interested in learning more about that, people that are interested in my business model, like producers specifically, I was kind of telling David earlier in the beginning of this that we look for really, really qualified consultants, people that love engaging with business owners and talking with them and building meaningful relationships. Our thing is that we build meaningful relationships, and insurance is a byproduct of everything else that we do. They just purchase through us. And as a result, our conversion ratios, it's like 4 times the national average. It's absolutely insane. It's incredible.
Amazing how that works, man. I tell people all the time, sometimes you just have to slow down and speed up in order to speed up. And, I think that's one of the most difficult things people have to deal with when they transition into the middle market, specifically because that sales cycle is so much longer. At 20 years in now, I know that if I write 4 accounts that are 50,000 in commission over the course of a year, that's a really good year. I mean, across all agencies, I mean, that's not whale hunter numbers by any stretch. That's a really healthy living if you can consistently do that over 2 decades,
Absolutely.
But the anxiety comes from the fact you're only writing 4 accounts a year. I could write 3 of them in fourth quarter and 1 of them in first quarter and have a mental roller coaster everywhere in between. And just having the ability to know, and this is why policies and procedures and processes are so important in agencies and even in sales process as an individual producer running their book. You have to be comfortable enough in your processes and the predictability of the results of those to know that it's going to be okay. I'm going to hit my numbers. These are the things that I always need to do. I don't know that you have that same level of anxiety with the small business, especially at 15,000 in revenue a pop, because you have constant activity going on in your operation at that point. But that's one piece that I would say, that I think is really, really important. If you're a producer, you have no intention whatsoever of ever owning an agency. That doesn't mean you don't need to have processes in terms of how you're handling your day, blocking your calendar, the activities that you have. The other thing that I think is really, really important, and I see this going away, but it hasn't, gone away completely. And that is, we have an aging population of agency principals that didn't do this stuff. And as a result, they're in trouble because their agency was their retirement plan, and they're not going to get the multiples that other people would get because they didn't take the time to build the business right from the foundation up. I also think that, and I'm going to make a blanket statement, it certainly doesn't apply to everybody, but I've seen a large number of the agency principals that are in this situation who, I don't want to necessarily say they fear technology. I think what they fear is a lack of controlling everything in the process. And that's reflected in the culture of their agency as well. And I think that a lot of the times when you have younger, more entrepreneurial people come in, if your goal is to perpetuate and keep up with or push the envelope with where the industry's going, you have to give up some level of control and exchange that for collaboration. I'm 51 and I still consider myself young relative to the overall agency principal demographic, but I am the oldest. The next closest person to me in the agency, 16 years younger than I am.
Yeah.
And so, when I ran grocery stores, I was 22 and everybody was older. And I remembered how that made me feel. One day I woke up, it didn't matter if I'm making $150,000 a year at 22 years old. And by the way, back then that 150 is worth like $500,000 today. But it bothered me because the people looked at me not based on my skill set, my intelligence, my education, or my execution. They looked at me as somebody who was stocking groceries a year and a half before, and they weren't going to take direction from me, and they weren't interested in what I had to say to make their bakery more profitable or their produce department more profitable. What could a 22-year-old kid know or understand about running a successful perishable operation? That bothered me enough that I've carried it with me the rest of my career. I was in the same boat in the last agency I was at before Florida Risk. The reason that Florida Risk exists is due to the fact, number one, a promise was broken, but number two, I didn't get anybody's ear. I was never going to have a say in the operation, even though I was a partner on paper and an equity holder. The two people who had more equity than me wanted to make all the decisions, and I was nothing more than a nuisance. So when I launched my agency, one of the things that I always said was, I'm going to have the final say, but I'm going to listen to what every other person in the operation has to say. If the people that are 16 years younger than me now are ultimately going to be running it, I need them to buy in and have skin in the game, but I also want to understand how they think, because that's who the agency is going to be selling to in another 10 years down the road. We can't run our business as if it's always going to be the same as it has been. And right now, there are every bit as many agency principals that are out figuring out the cheapest way to buy Courier and Ives, refrigerator magnets, and calendars at Christmas time with their co-op money as there are trying to figure out how to invest in the technology of their agency. One of them's going to sell for 12 to 15 multiple of EBITDA. The other one's going to sell for a discount to the other person because they've tried to control it and they haven't changed with the times.
Agreed.
Yeah, not sure what else can be said with that. But anyhow, listen, man, for a cold LinkedIn reach out, me happen to read one of your posts, like, that guy sounds like he thinks similarly to what I do. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking time out to come on.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me on here. It's been good.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we've been going about an hour. If anybody has any, I would say connect with Wade on LinkedIn if you want to reach out. But if you have another way that you prefer, feel free to let them know how to get a hold of you. I'm sure people will be interested to pick your brain.
Yeah, Wade Milward on LinkedIn is great, and then our website is protectmyfranchise.com.
I think one more thing before I let everybody go that we forgot to talk about, and we can do this quickly, is you're actively looking for producers right now. And I know that we have producers that are actively listening to this right now, but more specifically, you're listening to me because you are not getting support in the agency that you're in. They don't invest in training. They don't have the know-how, and you're putting your livelihood in somebody's hands. So if you're an unsupported producer and really want to do well in the industry and are maybe looking for an opportunity, I know that Wade has a very specific skill set that he's looking for. Talk to him a little bit about what you look for when you're recruiting a producer, and maybe if somebody's, looking for that better opportunity than where they're at, you may have an opportunity there.
Yep. Yeah, I'd love to touch on that. So I'm going to generalize it again, but the majority of insurance agencies do a terrible job at developing sales and marketing systems. They hire a producer, they set you up on a commission model. Sometimes there's a payback period. I can't remember what it's called. I'm drawing a blank, but anyways, it's a draw. You start up with some type of base pay, you do a draw, all that kind of stuff. The draw or the base pay goes away after 3 years and you're straight commission. And all the while there's no inbound leads. That's how most of these shops are set up, and it's set up for failure. 9 out of 10 producers fail within 2 years. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And yet these agency owners and principals think that they're highly successful because they have an agency with $15 million in premium. It makes no sense to me. So I thought about it differently. We want to set up our guys for success. We do it differently, but we have a sales and marketing system where we're feeding our guys leads every single day. These guys are closing deals on the daily. There's actually something else that we don't talk about often. There's a chemical response when you're winning all the time. It's dopamine.
100%, man.
Dopamine every single time. And it's a rush. It's a chase. They're chasing it constantly. Love it. And that's what I like. I love it. I still do deals on the franchisor side. That's where I still kind of do that stuff. But these guys, they find so much joy and excitement out of doing what they do. It's so cool to watch it. But so we're not looking for guys, like, if you're exhausted and tired of doing the freaking cold calls, which is super challenging. I give credit for David trying to do the 100 calls. What was it, yesterday or 2 days ago?
I got a goose egg on Monday, and yesterday, like, my post this morning was, I bombed. I didn't even make a call yesterday.
It's hard.
Life and work got in the way.
Exactly.
And my priorities went somewhere else, and it doesn't mean that it's right. But look, man, if anything else, I have no problem telling people when I'm going to be 100% transparent. There's too many people out there that are trying to convince agents to listen to them that either aren't in the game or were in the game and weren't successful, or are in the game, haven't figured it out, but they're looking for a side hustle. And that does not go across the board. I have a great relationship with a lot of other people who coach producers and have communities and all of that. This is not directed toward any specific person if people are trying to read between the lines. But if you pay attention to social, you know that what I'm talking about is 100% true. It's only a matter of about 48 hours till the next guru shows up that none of us have ever heard before. And so if I can go on there, if I can go on there and be transparent with you and say, look, man, I've got a book that's north of $2 million in revenue personally, but I screwed the pooch yesterday. I didn't book a single appointment, and it's not okay with me. I don't believe in participation trophies. I set the benchmark that I wanted to have 150 to 250 in revenue in play based on making 100 calls a day, 5 days this week. I already missed the number. And in my post, I said this: what's my penance? We're running it back next week, and I will run it back every week until I get the numbers and show what the ultimate value of that's going to be. Part of the other issue is I see people out there all the time saying cold calling's dead. It doesn't work. Listen, man, I don't care what you do in business, sports, or whatever else. At this day and age, you have to be a 5-tool player, period.
Yes, it's everything.
It can't be hunting. It has to be hunting. It has to be social. It has to be email. It has to be content driven. Like you have to hit from all angles. And guess what? Every one of them is going to give you a little couple pieces here or there. We're going to gravitate toward the one we like the most, but we can't neglect the other ones. And one of the examples, again, not to regurgitate my entire LinkedIn post, but when you're in this game, it's no different than being a competitive athlete. I played baseball my entire life through college. And I said, it's like practicing bunting. Nobody wants to practice bunting. But if you're in game 7 of the World Series with one down, a guy on third, and the coach puts the squeeze on, what are you going to do if you haven't practiced bunting and now all of a sudden you're getting paid millions of dollars a year to drop one down the first baseline? You're screwed. Yeah. And this is 100% the same way. You have to put in the reps every single day. I haven't dialed for dollars in years, probably 5 or 6 years at this point. So I was automatically rusty coming out of the gates, but that came back relatively quickly. Now it's a matter of fine tuning and continuing to get my reps every day. So moral of the story, get your reps in, people. You have to do it. Other than that, we'll catch you next time. See ya.